morning, everybody. Hope everybody had a great weekend. So just a few things that I wanted to touch upon, just touch base on a few areas of things that we are working on and particular news. First of all, really good news is that Montgomery County, for the 6th year in a row, has been named the healthiest county in the state by the University of Wisconsin Population Health Institute and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. This is really, great news. I think that council has worked very hard with previous administrations to promote a lot of healthy opportunities, both within county government with our wellness program, but also particular bills that address issues around, for example, smoking. Now we're looking at lead in water fountains in the school system. But we also do know, and we are cognizant that there's still some disparities that exist, and so we also work very hard to address those. Nonetheless, this is really awesome that we've received this news once again. Wanted to point that out. Also, tomorrow evening, we're going to kick off a campaign, public campaign finance public hearing. This is an opportunity for anybody really to give us feedback on the public campaign finance program. Now that we've wrapped up its inaugural debut with the last campaign and election. This particular program, as you know, was established in 2014, and this was Bill 16-14. It was a bill that my committee worked really hard to get through. We understood that this was a first, and therefore there might be some particular amendments or tweaks that we would make, especially after the first election, and so that's what we're doing right now. I can tell you that during that election cycle, 68 candidates ran for either executive or council. Of the 38 candidates that filed an intent to use public campaign financing for one of these offices, 23 candidates ultimately obtained public campaign finance. 2/3 of council members who won an elected office in 2018 chose public financing, as did the county executive. The county ultimately spent $5.2 million during the 2018 elections on this particular program. 4.1 was during the primary, 1.1 during the general election. So once again, I think there's going to be probably a lot of good feedback on particular things that we need to address. Some might be through regulation, but some might require some legislative amendments. And again, the deadline to sign up is tomorrow, March 26th at 10 a.m. There is also a particular survey that was distributed to all candidates, also to the League of Women Voters, Progressive Maryland, Common Cause, Board of Elections, and others to gather, of course, additional feedback. So we look forward to that session tomorrow evening. As you know, the racial equity and social justice work continues, and last Wednesday it was really amazing that we had well, that was actually March 13th. We had in the evening an incredible forum with over 500 people in attendance and a lot of energy and a lot of interest in having other opportunities for people to participate. On April 8th, I will join a student member of the Board of Education, Anania Tadikonda, who is hosting a youth engagement forum at Gaithersburg High School that would focus on this particular issue. And we are also distributing the toolkits to any organization or any community group, any neighborhood group that wants to hold their own conversation. Actually ran into some ladies from Leisure World at Brookside Garden Orchid Show, and they approached me and said that they're preparing to, they're going to organize a conversation on racial equity and social justice at Leisure World. That was really awesome. As you know, we have received the budget transmittal from County Executive Elrich, and we obviously will, we'll be very busy trying to address all these issues. Welcome, Councilmember Tom Hucker. We have, of course, focused, and we will focus on prioritizing funding for core services, such as education and public safety, protecting our safety net services, as well as making strategic investments for our county's economic and fiscal future. We will kick off the public hearings on April 8th, 9th, and 10th, and the committee work sessions will begin on April 11th. As you probably know, already, this budget request holds the line on taxes and increases the county reserve to the targeted 10% by 2020. But it does not fully fund the school system requested budget. Neither does it fund Montgomery College's request, as well as park and planning. So these are issues that we're going to have to address. We also are going to be looking very closely at the decrease to OPEB in fiscal year 2019, and we'll look at the negotiated compensation agreements as well, to make sure that we are tracking issues of sustainability. We are very excited about the down payment of the $7 million to the Early Care and Education Initiative, very excited about the Flash Bus service, the investments in the small business sector. Of course, Wheaton Library opening is a very exciting thing for me personally. It's the Library Recreation Center opening in the summer, this summer. So I think these are some really awesome highlights. And anybody that wants to testify can call 240-777-7803. And of course, we always provide interpretation services. I also wanted to point out, and I've invited Councilmember Hucker here as well, because he is the chair of the Transportation and Environment Committee. We did have a very, I think, robust conversation with Transportation Secretary Pete Ron, as well as the State Highway Administrator Greg Slater, regarding the status of the state's managed lane study for I-495 and 270. Let me just say overall, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague if he wants to add anything. I think the council is, very clear on some of our concerns that center generally around issues of right-of-way, not really having a straightforward answer, whether specifically homes and businesses will be protected. We also are very concerned about the issues that continue to affect our residents in the Elk County region, and did not feel satisfied with some of the answers regarding what the project will be focusing on, because it doesn't address many of those areas of the county that we know we need some relief. Also, the issue of community engagement, I think it's one that we stressed. A lot of the feedback that we are receiving is that there has not been the appropriate level of community engagement. And with something this complex, I think you need to err on the side of having more in order to be able to fully engage and inform the community as things are progressing. So those are some of the highlights, I think, of this conversation, but I will also turn it to you, Councilmember Hucker, if you want to add any other specifics.
Thank you, Council President.
Come over here, Council.
Yep. Thank you, Council President. Sorry, I'm freestyling here after just finishing a hearing on Bill 119. I think it's absolutely true that we had a freewheeling discussion with the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation and the State Highway Administrator. We're glad they came in before the council to update us on the study. It's been too long since we had an update, and we had been asking for updates previously. I think the whole process is somewhat troubling. The council and the county executive for years have been sending priority letters to the Maryland Department of Transportation asking for relief on the American Legion Bridge, asking for relief on 270 in particular, and we were not really consulted when MDOT decided to begin this process. We're glad that they are looking at Montgomery County for congestion relief. We wish they would be assiduously taking the advice of our transportation officials and our planners who have developed the greatest expertise in the state on our local problems. I would call your attention to this letter that we sent to the Secretary. It's not, I shouldn't say it's not often, but not all the time do the county executive and every council member agree on a complicated policy proposal, but we all put our signatures on this letter because we all agreed that the state's study is flawed in a couple ways, namely that it doesn't include transit alternatives. None of the 7 screened alternatives include a transit component, which is very much unwise and against the wishes of the great majority of Montgomery County, and also that it doesn't properly sequence the attention. We agree that they should focus on the American Legion Bridge. We agree they should focus on HOV and hot lanes on 270. We've been asking for that for years, and on the western portion of the Beltway. We do not agree that they should move forward with the expansion of 495 east of the spur, which would likely involve taking hundreds of homes, small businesses, potentially there's a hospital and a golf course in the way. They have not shared details on how that would happen. The governor, of course, made a public promise not to take properties, and then the secretary backed away from that in front of all of us last week. So I think those developments are troubling. And just speaking for myself, not the council, I mentioned to the secretary, I was serving in Annapolis. Doug was doing time in Annapolis too when we passed the P3 legislation through the General Assembly. It was always envisioned during the recession as a way to use private sector resources to deliver a major transportation project like the Purple Line. And unfortunately, at that time, we had the support of the county executive of Montgomery and Prince George's County, the county council, unanimous support of the Montgomery and Prince George's County Council for the Purple Line, and the support of the Montgomery and the Prince George's delegation. In this case, they're moving ahead with this 270 and 495 project without the support of the county executive or the county council or our state delegation, Senate and House delegation. And I asked the secretary, will you continue to move forward without getting our support? And he basically said yes. So that, I think, is troubling just from a process perspective, and it's not the way the P3 bill law was, it's not consistent with the spirit of the P3 law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Copies of the letter. Great, thank you.
Okay. We also, of course, have been very busy with the Veirs Mill Corridor Master Plan, and that particular master plan will be coming onto the full council very soon. I think this plan has been a bit difficult because, in my opinion, it's one of the first plans where we have a considerable amount of market affordable housing that will most likely displace a lot of people. And so we're working very diligently to see what can we do creatively to offer, provide the zoning necessary for additional density, additional height in order to have no net loss. There's one particular apartment complex where I think that's going to be very difficult to do, but I think we're working very hard on addressing these issues. Also, as the first plan, as you know, that is really being put forth through the lens of Vision Zero. And I think it's in many ways the work that the Fed Committee has done, I think really sets the stage for future master plans where we know organically there have been many corridors where the density has really increased, and but issues around pedestrian safety and how to best facilitate that has not kept up. And so I do believe that this plan will provide a lot of that as we move forward with that work. And then I think lastly what I will mention is that, as you know, we are in the process of beginning the issue of a police chief search. This is something the county executive is obviously going to, I think he's already engaged in. There was a letter that the county council signed on to, and this is something that some nonprofit organizations, community organizations, I think met with every council member, pointing to their desire for there to be a robust process for this search, and pointing to what has been done in Baltimore in order to provide transparency and a process that engages the community, because this is such an important position for our county. And so we sent a letter basically describing and affirming that we should look at what has been done in jurisdictions like Baltimore, and that the executive requesting that he also open up a search process similar to this one. So we hope that we will hear from them pretty soon about what that will look like, and we shall see what occurs. All right, so with that, I'll just open it up to questions from both of us.
Thank you.
When was this letter precedes or pre or post meeting?
Before the meeting.
Before the meeting. Okay. So do you feel like you got most most of your answers answered in that meeting? Or, I mean, you said you had concerns still after that meeting, and how do you see this moving forward?
I think that we we engage, in my opinion, in a very robust conversation. I think it is very important for us to continue to state our concerns and continue to do the advocacy that we need to do. I can't say that there was a lot of commitments that were made, but it is very important to have all of this on the record as well as we continue to represent the views and the concerns of our constituents.
And there is legislation right now by Montgomery County delegates in the House that passed P3 reform that does give you an environmental impact project. It gives you financial statements of those private entities that would come in to help fund this. And there were other bills that didn't pass. Where are you hoping this goes? I mean, as far as the state level, what are you hoping to do? Because if those don't, those didn't pass, like the consent that a county would have to give to have that done, or some of the other ones that just didn't pass. What are you hoping happens? If that P3 reform doesn't pass?
Well, I can say for myself, I think that just means that we are going to have to continue this advocacy on a much broader level. We were hoping that some of those would actually pass because then it would set us in a better course. But now it just means that we have to monitor this even closer and be as vocal as possible. I don't know if you want to add something, Tom.
Yeah, and certainly the governor hasn't. Not all those bills have passed, and the governor hasn't signed the legislation.
He said if he would sign it.
Pardon me?
He hasn't said if he would sign it.
That's exactly right. So, I mean, what we're hoping, I think, is very clear, that we can begin a much more collaborative process with the governor, and can initiate a process that also not only respects the wishes of our elected officials in Montgomery County, the county executive and the county council, but the public at large. There was a number of council members who raised concerns about the way they've conducted these outreach sessions, that they've to date been essentially sort of dog and pony shows where a lot of information is presented in a one-way manner, feedback isn't really taken up in a formal way, and they have 4 listening sessions coming that are scheduled in Montgomery County. Councilman Rice pointed out that there wasn't one in Germantown, obviously a very important part of our the large community in Montgomery County, and we really want them to be run in a different way, and we want a collaborative relationship with the governor, not one that's decisions are imposed from Annapolis.
And I think generally speaking, I think it's important to point out that we really want the same goals. I mean, it's not as if, we're saying that we don't want relief. It's not as if we don't understand that this is a very critical component of our quality of life and our economic development goals. So all we're asking is to please meet us, in a compromised fashion and respect those concerns that these residents have. They're very legitimate. So I think that's where we are. We're in that process of making sure that we're as vocal as we can, while understanding that at the end of the day, we do have the same goal and we shouldn't be so far apart.
If I can follow up on what you said, though, I remember Labor Day, the governor said, no, absolutely not. No homes will be taken. Right. I'm telling you, absolutely not. You're saying the Secretary of Transportation last week walked back? Precisely what did he say that walked that back? Forgive me, I was out last week, so.
Yeah, I mean, he would not, when he was asked directly, what he talked about was, and he actually mentioned certain areas where there would not be impact, but also said that, they might need right-of-way in order to do staging and things of that nature. And we specifically asked, what about homes and what about particular businesses? He said that they would do whatever they could to mitigate that, but he was not, unequivocally, saying that they wouldn't. So that was different. From
that contradiction was pointed out. Yeah. And he, I think twice, you'd have to check the tape, but said he would incentivize the minimization of taking property, but would not rule it out the way the governor drew a very clear red line.
And then if I can follow up on the way these sessions are going, because I've talked to the governor's office about this before, and they're saying, but we're having these sessions, it's all very out in the open. You can go to the website, you can see what the plans look like. What precisely do you want from them?
Well, if I may, I think there's and I think the council president was correct a minute ago when she suggested we're looking for just a collaborative relationship. I think the respect that our community deserves on this. There's a win-win that's out there, and it's very clear in our letter. We want them to focus on the bridge first. We want them to focus on 270 in the western portion of the Beltway. We've been asking for relief there for years. We have not received it from the state year after year after year. It's great they want to focus on congestion in Montgomery County, finally, in the 5th year of the Hogan administration. This is the place to start. We all agree on that. You'll have no quarrel with us if you start on 270, the western portion of the Beltway, and the bridge. Those are long overdue. Where we have concerns is that they shouldn't start on 495 east of the spur, where their right-of-way is much more constrained, where there's a lot more private property in the way, and they should include transit because to have 7 alternatives that only add road capacity without adding transit, without adding capacity for our rapid transit bus system to perform in that corridor, is really, as some council members said, a mid-20th century solution to a 21st century problem.
Yes.
On the police chief search, how close are you guys actually to finding someone to replace Chief Manger, and are you confident that there will be a replacement by the time Chief Manger retires next month?
Well, Dan, as you know, this is a search that is obviously being conducted by the county executive. So, when you ask how close are we, this is something that he is right now actively doing. What the county council is doing is just reflecting and transmitting the sentiment of many in the community to have a much broader community-focused process. So not just, enlist a search firm or look within, and there are at least, 2 candidates from within that have been identified. But what the community is saying is for there to be a much broader community engagement process so that focus and the affirmation of, community input can be done.
But there are 2 candidates that are being considered right now?
No, that's not what I said. What I said is that there have been at least 2 candidates which have been mentioned publicly from within the police department that are pretty much being considered, and it's something that Chief Manger said, that he feels very good that at least these 2 folks from within could potentially be really great, but that's not, as far as I know, that's not what they're just going to focus on. They're also looking at a national possibility.
One of the things the county executive had said was he really wanted either a woman police chief or a minority, and he was having trouble finding someone. Is that something that the council would also echo?
I think that what we want is to have the most qualified police chief that we can find that understands what Montgomery County is all about, who we are as a community, and has a very, I think, strong track record in community policing. I cannot speak for what the executive considers to be his primary criteria, but I can tell you that the community wants to know that whoever comes, it's somebody that fully understands Montgomery County's population and understands also community policing. From that perspective, it's really important to establish those connections and that relationship. It's key. So I think that's what we would be looking for.
Can I ask, when is the last time you talked with the county executive about this process?
I think we had some very informal conversations. I believe it was back in December when he was just, talking to me. We were having lunch and just kind of generally talking about some of his thoughts on this particular position. But now, obviously, it's, Chief Manger is leaving, et cetera. We have not had any formal conversation about the process. But now, we've sent this letter just letting him know that organizations like Casa de Maryland met with each of us and have pointed out to the process in Baltimore and really wanted us to, to ensure that something like this could also take place in the county.
Councilmember Jawando has a bill for today or tomorrow that would have independent investigations of instances when police were killed on the line of duty.
Yes.
Can you speak to that bill and exactly how much support you think that could garner from the council? And why now for this bill?
Well, this is a bill that was sponsored by all council members. and I think they were just wrapping up the Public Safety Committee session on this. So, now I have to go see what they discussed. But I think every single council member feels strongly that this would be a positive thing to have here in the county, established through law, just because, of any future incidents like these, the one that occur with Mr. White. It's really important to have something like this. So we feel strongly it's always about the details, and I think that's what they were, at least in this first session, trying to iron out, because, you have to be also realistic about, adopting particular laws, make sure that you can actually enforce it and implement it. So, we'll see what the session, what they decided during this session.
And how does the process work now? I'm unfamiliar. Is it the state's attorney's office or someone else does an independent inspector general does a
There is a memorandum of understanding with Howard County so that, whenever there is an officer involved, shooting, death, instead of really sort of investigating your own, there is this particular arrangement. But Councilmember Joando's bill, enshrines this in law, but it takes it a little further. And I think that sometimes it's important to have things in law, but it is about how do you implement it. And I think that's why this session this morning was important, because it's about the capacity. It's about, which jurisdictions have the capacity. Then if you're going to put it in law, you're going to mandate it. Who has the capacity then to come in and do that reciprocal kind of investigation. And so those are some of the things that they were discussing this morning.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes. Back to the 495-270 study, I heard you mention 7 alternatives. Just so I'm clear, is there one in particular, one alternative that you're more in favor of or proposing?
I don't have all the alternatives. I know Dr. Orland is here. There are a couple of the council has looked at and aligns with what we had been on record.
There aren't any alternatives that are specifically what the council's in favor of or against. All the alternatives involve adding either toll lanes or what's called high-frequency toll lanes or just express toll lanes. And there were no, as Mr. Hucker mentioned, there's no purely transit alternative. And so what's included in the letter, when we look at it, there's some ideas of, for example, providing direct ramps from some of the overpasses on 270 to those lanes, which would be used by the express bus service or bus rapid transit. The Secretary didn't say anything one or the other about whether or not he would include those in his next version of this next part of the study, but it's something that we've advocated there. That's one way that we could sort of take some of their screened alternatives and turn them into something that could also provide much better transit, but we'll see.
Thanks.
And this is not unusual when there are projects like these, that there might be alternatives that are presented, and then we begin to get into this, sort of back and forth about what we would like to see included, and hopefully, we hope that we can exert enough influence so that we can come up with a compromise that works for the county. Okay. Yes.
And I had one question about the budget. Have y'all had any conversations with members of the County Retiree Employees Association regarding the OPEB fund?
That hasn't happened yet, but we do have a lunch coming up, I think, next week. It's coming up in the next 2 weeks. And I am sure that this will be a topic of discussion.
On the budget, Mr. Elbert said he left you guys $10 million to spend as you see fit.
It's very generous.
Obviously, just filling in the Montgomery College and NCPS needs is more than $10 million. Is there anything you'd like to comment about the $10 million?
So every year, obviously, every year is different in terms of budget process. As president, council president really does work to figure out what will be the process for the particular year. This $10 million is, I always say, it's like, when you're told that for, Christmas you're going to get, I don't know, $200 from your uncle, and then in your mind you've already spent it, 1,000 different ways. It's the same thing. As you pointed out, the fact that he did not fully fund the school system's request already puts a big, pressure, not just on that $10 million, but where else could we find resources to do that? We have issues with providers of disabled community. There's a DD supplement that also I know we are going to have to look at. Montgomery College has also been left short. So there are a lot of different areas. We're going to be looking very closely at, other sources where we might have some flexibility for funding. There aren't very many, so this is something that we're going to be very looking at very closely. That $10 million usually, I thought it would be pretty much like a down payment on any possible reconciliation list. But given these big areas, I think that's going to be tough. So I don't know, to be honest. We are just getting started, but nobody should think that this is $10 million to use for new initiatives or expansion. It looks like that's money that obviously we're going to have to dedicate to some of these areas that the county executive left short.
Okay. Is that everybody? Okay.
Thank you so much.